Conor vs. Khabib was a phenomenal fight. Yet while the evening started with an amazing sight, for many, it left a bad taste in the mouth at the end of it. Anyone who follows UFC knows that the negative side of the story already started at least 6 months ago and to a degree reached its climax at the end of the fight, with many questions being asked. How much does the UFC allow? What is the right and wrong thing to do for an athlete? And for some people, does MMA and UFC bring the worst out of people? It has always been easiest to judge whenever wrong was done. If a person did 9 things right and he made a mistake the 10th time, most people will only remember the mistake, forgetting all the good that was done. It is so easy to leave out the small and unknown details aside and to come to obvious conclusions that are comfortable and easy to make for us while judging others. Yet it takes much more to consider the whole picture to try to understand both sides. YouTube is packed right now with people choosing sides, blaming one or the other fighter for doing the wrong thing. As soon as someone does something wrong, it is so easy to disassociate ourselves and to antagonize someone. Having personally been in too many situations where I was trying to do the right thing, yet when I slipped, all my good was forgotten, in this video, I want to look together with you at the side of the picture which most people don't look at or speak about when discussing Conor vs. Khabib and what took place before and right after the fight. In this video, instead of disassociating ourselves from these two amazing athletes and individuals, I want us to consider the hidden side of things and for once, imagine ourselves in their position to better understand what really happened. In this video, I want to take a look with you at Conor vs. Khabib and what is the right thing to do for us. Before I begin sharing my arguments, I want to make a quick disclaimer that I'm no professional fighter and I'm quite new to MMA and UFC, yet martial arts and recently combat sports have been an inseparable part of my life. I have also always been investigating deeply into what it means to be a martial artist, both on and off the mat, and how our psyche relates to it. In the end, as human beings, we are much more similar than we think, as long as we are honest about our experience and we allow ourselves to look for similarities and to relate rather than to disassociate. Thus, to understand the hidden picture behind Conor and Khabib, let us begin by taking a look at the human aspect of the story. No one's life is easy, and we all have our limits, be it a school teacher or a professional athlete. Even the most peaceful person can break if he reaches his limit, and I strongly believe that this is what happened to Khabib at the end of the fight. When Conor was giving him a difficult time, Khabib did not shoot back and kept his calm. I can very much relate to it because I hold myself in a similar way. In many difficult life situations, I do not shoot back and I keep my calm, while holding everything in, even when the situation is actually stressful for me. I do this to make sure I'm able to respond properly and not to destabilize the situation. Yet I too know personally very well that while this way my calm stays in difficult situations, allowing me to act properly, something does accumulate in the back seat. As I said before, we all have our limits. What matters is how far these limits are. Even if they're very far, a day will never come when we will not have a limit. It is an impressive feat to be able to hold our calm even when we are emotionally attacked, and it requires strong self-discipline. Yet when our limit is reached nevertheless, we are not in for a nice ride. My personal limits are quite far, and I can take quite a bit compared to most and stay calm. And if I don't reach my limit, eventually the build-up pressure goes away. Yet on those very rare occasions, when more than I can handle builds up, it leads to a very sudden, unexpected burst of angry emotions which leaves everyone shocked. Why? Because they had never expected that from me, since normally I'm the most peaceful person they know. Unfortunately, some then directly go to conclusions that this burst means my peaceful attitude that I presented before was never real. Yet is that fair to do? What about all those other situations where I did manage to keep my calm for much longer than others? When I managed to take on huge amounts of pressure and still stay there for others in emotional balance? Is that not something that is worth remembering? Is that not something that is worth respect? Yet as I said before, people tend to easily forget the good things and quickly focus on the bad, even if they're few. I really feel the same happened with Khabib. While he is generally very respectful and maintains his posture very well, even he has limits, and it is clear that McGregor and all the other surrounding circumstances were able to reach them for Khabib, even if the limit was reached just at the end of the event. And the same story happened as I have personally experienced, where most, suddenly forget about all the respect and self-discipline that Khabib showed all the years before and quickly fell to judge him for that single moment, taking that single moment as the defining moment of him. True, what Khabib did after the fight is not something that a professional athlete should do, yet don't we all have our slipping moments? It is also important to note that as people, we tend to generalize things and put them together into one. The fact that Khabib's friends assaulted Conor is something that I'm not willing to justify, yet I see too many people crediting Khabib as if it was his responsibility that it happened, which is once more just not fair. And here I ask you the question, will we focus on the single negative thing Khabib did, or we will focus on everything else he did before and how he held himself all the way to that infamous moment? When we look at the accumulation of negative emotions, I also want to bring our attention to Conor. From everything I explored, it definitely seems that Conor is using the trash talk as a method to both grow interest and to affect his opponent's mentality, which while is not a tasteful strategy, it seems to be an effective one nonetheless for both named reasons. Does this strategy reflect his character? Honestly, that is not for me or anyone else who does not know him personally to say. Personally, myself, being a growing public figure on YouTube, I know how sometimes to win in the system you have to make some sacrifices. In my case, by making a clickbait title or a video which is less personally relevant but more interesting to a larger audience to achieve better results on the whole and to give me the space to do other more heartfelt things. I always try to maintain balance between my personal integrity and the sacrifices I do to fit into the YouTube platform, since otherwise it's nearly impossible to maintain your career in this media. And yet, while I always try to never step too far away from my personal values, many people still do not see both sides of the picture and quickly judge me and label me as insincere or dishonest, while they are not willing to make the effort to look in deeper and to understand what is happening behind the picture. And yet again, I personally know that unless a person has been in my shoes or knows me personally, it will be very difficult for such a person to really understand what is happening behind my decisions. Same way, none of us have had the same experience as Conor McGregor, and almost none of us has experienced neither the bouts that he had, nor the fame which comes both with benefits and downsides. Having only 50,000 subscribers, I already know from experience how tough it is to always be exposed to the part of people who constantly express their hatred and disbelief towards you. I can only imagine how difficult it may be for Conor to constantly stand off against hundreds of thousands of his haters, not to mention being recognized everywhere you go, barely having any personal life. There may be so many factors that are active for him that most of us will never be familiar with, and yet many still judge him as if they perfectly know what he is about. We also know nothing of what is happening in his personal life. For example, have you ever been affected by difficulties at home, and while you're normally a great guy, on that day you are just an asshole to everyone? There is a great story of a man who rides a metro home, and at a certain stop, a father with 2 children comes in and takes a seat. The 2 kids start to go wild, creating noise and bugging everyone around, while the father says or does nothing to stop them. Mad about seeing how the father doesn't do anything about it, the protagonist comes to the father and says in an angry voice, "Hey, can you do something about your children?" While the father replies, "Oh, sorry, I didn't even see that it's happening. You see, I'm coming with my children from the hospital where my wife just died, and both me and my children have no idea how to handle it right now." As the story very well portrays, we never really know what is going on in the lives of others. Yet what we mostly care about is how people act externally. Does that justify Conor's throw of the chair in the bus? Of course not. That was a dangerous act which just luckily ended well enough. But it was an act from which he hopefully learned from. And how many people, when it happened, stopped to think, "Oh man, I wonder what difficulties Conor is going through. I really don't justify what he did back there, but I also hope that it doesn't mean something bad is happening in his personal life that's just too tough to handle. You know, maybe under the same conditions, I might have done the same thing." Yes, I know. We do not live in an enlightened world where everyone is mature enough to consider all aspects of the situation. Yet this is why I made this video. It is to remind us all that there are always many sides to a story, and it is the easy way out to look at excluded details, only a single side of the picture, and to label and judge based on it. Same way as Khabib snapped, Conor did 6 months before that. And while this does not take away responsibility from what they both did, I want to say that in an ideal world, we should focus not primarily on their single actions, but on trying to understand why this really happened and also giving a shot to try to imagine ourselves in their situations to understand them. As we learn from our mistakes, we need to give space and support for them to learn from theirs, instead of putting a label on their forehead for the rest of their lives, coming to some personally driven conclusions. I intentionally said that relating and trying to understand the whole picture happens in an ideal world, since I don't expect everyone to do that. But the funny thing is, ideal or not, you can do that right now and suddenly see a very different picture of the same situation. Some people say that these incidents are a sign that MMA breeds bad mentality. The truth is, you can find both good and bad mentality anywhere, and the same applies to MMA. In MMA, there are some of the most humble and disciplined people, and there are also some who act inappropriately. That is once more because we're all humans with our own personal problems that we're trying to deal with, and once we slip, people once more tend to focus on that single moment without giving any space. There is enough judging to go around for everyone. One day you are the hero, the next day you yourself may very well become the proclaimed villain without any intention. I did not want this video to be another side-choosing video, preaching to everyone who did what right, who did what wrong, or to put a label whether MMA fighters are good or bad. There's already enough of that. What I want to do is to remind everyone that we are all human, and until we will get to experience the same things these fighters did, we will never really know fully what happened. And in reality, the best thing we can really do is to try to understand them as best as we can and to be there for them, supporting them, forgiving them for the slips, giving them space to grow, and remembering the good things they've done and will continue doing while bearing a weight on their shoulders that most of us can only imagine. This was Rokas, and I wish you to own your journey.